This week, the federal government approved the construction of Enbridge's Northern Gateway pipeline. However, it's dependent on the company's meeting 209 conditions set down by the Joint Review Panel. The pipeline would carry diluted bitumen from Alberta's oil sands to British Columbia, where it would be picked up by oil tankers along the coast. Environmental and First Nations groups alike are vowing that the project will not go forward. Joining us now for their analysis of this decision in Vancouver, British Columbia, Kai Nagata. He is Energy and Democracy Director at the Dogwood Initiative. And in Calgary, Alberta, Jennifer Winter, Research Associate of Energy and Environmental Policy at the University of Calgary. And as I welcome the two of you to the program tonight, let's just start by putting up a picture of where this is all taking place. Here's the map of Western Canada, and we're going to take a look at Enbridge's proposal for the Northern Gateway pipeline, costing nearly $8 billion, crossing over almost 1,200 kilometers, carrying approximately 525,000 barrels of oil per day, it's presumed, from the landlocked Alberta oil sands to a supertanker port off the coast of northern British Columbia. That's the red line that shows where it's all supposed to go. Let's get started. Jennifer, when you heard the decision, what was your initial reaction?
Well, I was actually on a plane, increasing my carbon footprint, and so when I got off in Calgary, the first thing I did was check the news, and I thought, wow, it actually got approved with the original 209 conditions.
So you were pleased that it got approved with the conditions?
Oh, absolutely. The Joint Review Panel process was very thorough and outlined a number of 209 to be exact important conditions that Enbridge needs to fulfill, and I trust the Joint Review Panel's assessment rather than a political assessment of the necessary conditions to build the pipeline.
Kai, what was your view?
Well, the fact is that the federal government made this into a political decision when they took the power away from the National Energy Board to make the final call over this. It's always been a cabinet decision from the beginning. So we looked at it through the lens of a political decision. And I would say what was most surprising from here in British Columbia was to see the federal government in Ottawa basically throw at least half a dozen Conservative MPs under the bus here when you consider the political implications for them in the next federal election.
How do you mean they threw them under the bus?
Well, you can see by the reaction of the caucus members this week to questions from journalists and from opposition members that they're unwilling to defend this project and this decision publicly. And when you look at 2 years ago, where the government was on this file, Joe Oliver's advocacy as Natural Resources Minister on behalf of this particular project, this particular proponent, and then contrast that to the approach now, you can see how the political stakes have shifted when the Conservative Party isn't even willing to put its own brand behind this project.
Jennifer, did you find it odd that neither the Prime Minister nor any of his cabinet ministers had a press conference announcing this? They essentially put it out in a press release and that was it?
I did think it was a little strange, but on the other hand, I think part of it is accepting that the Joint Review Panel was an independent process, and while they've brought the final decision up into cabinet, I think it says something about their respect for the independent review process, that they're not branding it as a Conservative government or a Harper government initiative.
In fact, Kai, there were members of the Conservative government, I think just the other day, who did say, we haven't approved this, that's why we're not getting behind this, that's why we've taken the approach to announce this that we have. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think, again, I'd point out the contrast in the rhetoric from even 18 months ago when this was being spoken about as an essential project, something that, Prime Minister Harper was referring to Keystone when he called it a no-brainer, but their advocacy on behalf of pipeline projects compared to that very measured language now where they're saying we haven't actually approved the project, we've simply approved the NEB's recommendation, I think is several steps backward politically from where they were a couple of years ago.
Now, Jennifer, you did mention the 209 conditions that have to be met before this can go forward. I don't want you to comment on all 209 of them here, but can you give us a for instance of what the company has to go through in order to get the green light on this eventually?
Let's see, there are a lot of different conditions. Some of them are regarding continuing the consultation process with landowners and First Nations group during construction and operation. Some of them are in regards to spill response, marine safety, marine spill response, etc. There are a lot of conditions under that they have to fulfill.
And Kai, if they do fulfill those conditions, does that give you any more peace of mind about allowing this project to go ahead?
Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think the conditions are better than nothing. And I would just point out that there's another 5 conditions that Enbridge has committed to respect, and that's the conditions laid in place by the Premier of British Columbia and the Government of British Columbia in their submission to the Joint Review Panel on this project, in which they did formally reject this project and say that it shouldn't be built as proposed. And so now we have a situation where the federal government has actually acknowledged the jurisdiction of the province over 60 permits that would apply to things like freshwater crossings in British Columbia. And by downloading some of that responsibility from federal cabinet to the National Energy Board in terms of enforcing those 209 conditions, to the province of British Columbia in terms of approving their own provincial permits, and to First Nations and local landowners along the route, you can see that they've really spread out the responsibility, and in a way they've given a lot more leverage to the people who are actually most directly affected by the proposal, which I think is a good thing.
Well, you did just mention the 5 conditions that BC Premier Clark put in place, and we actually have a list of those here. So let's put those on the record, and then we'll talk about those some more. Premier Clark's conditions include an environmental review needing to be passed, world-leading marine oil spill prevention and response needs to be in place, world-leading practices for land oil spill prevention and response need to be in place, First Nations opportunities and treaty rights respected, and a fair share of the fiscal and economic benefits going to British Columbia at the end of the day. Only one of these conditions, the Premier says, has been met so far. So, Jennifer, what's your view on the possibility of all 5 of these conditions being met?
Well, I think with the exception of the fair share condition, the Joint Review Panel's 209 conditions are entirely consistent with the other 4 that the BC government has put forward.
The fair share is a problem, though?
No, I just think that the fair share doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the Joint Review Panel.
So if BC wants to get that, they're going to have to get at it some other way? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I really think that it's hard to define what fair share means. It's a very vague concept. And the reality is that BC is going to get economic benefits, tax revenue from the pipeline going through BC, additional revenue, tax revenue from the port of Kitimat growing and the tanker traffic. So it is going to see some additional benefit associated with the pipeline. And the question is whether or not the spill prevention and spill response is going to mitigate the risk enough to make British Columbians and the government of BC happy.
Kai, when you look at those 5 conditions, how much wiggle room do you see in them?
Well, they're political talking points. This is not legislation, and that's what's so interesting for people on both sides of the Rockies, is that Christy Clark has set out these conditions with no definitions attached, which means, in my opinion, it's up to the people of British Columbia, the people who are most directly affected, to help define those, since that's our government speaking on our behalf. So when you go back to the Joint Review Panel and you look at what the BC government actually submitted in their rejection of the pipeline, they talked about effective spill response. And effective spill response, I would hope, means that you clean up more than 3 or 5% of the oil that lands in the ocean. But unfortunately, in real-world conditions, what we've seen from the Gulf of Mexico, the Kalamazoo spill, and Exxon Valdez, which still hasn't been cleaned up all these years later, is that effective spill response is a much higher bar. And I think that's what British Columbia, our government and our people, are asking for as a way of, as Jennifer says, mitigating the risks and getting us closer to a position where we could think of that risk as being worth the reward.
Let me just clarify, though, Kai. Is it your position that this thing ought not to be built under any circumstances?
Personally, that's how I feel, having lived in British Columbia. My family's been here for 100 years. We've fished on this coast and made our living on this coast for more than a century. And I think for us, the risks are not worth the rewards. And for my First Nations friends that I work with in the area that would be directly affected by the tanker traffic, those cultures, that 10,000 years of history and that ability to gather food from the land around you, I think is not worth the quote-unquote economic benefits that are being offered. But that's a personal opinion. As a representative of Dogwood Initiative, we believe in decision-making power being held by the people who are affected, and that's the province of British Columbia. It's our tax base. We would be the ones paying. We would be the ones who would take the economic hit in the event of all the industries that do depend on the coast being wiped out by an oil spill. So I think, regardless of where people stand on this issue, the fundamental issue for us is democratic, and that's that we've got a federal government imposing a piece of policy unilaterally on a province, and I think it's incumbent on us to step up and take responsibility for being a part of that decision.
Jennifer, is there anything that you would say to Kai that you think could alleviate his concerns?
Well, I do think it's unfair to say that the federal government is imposing the pipeline on British Columbia unilaterally. It did go through the review process, and that process was quite exhaustive. There was an environmental review, there was an assessment of the risks, the costs, the economic benefit, and the Joint Review Panel did find that the economic benefits to all Canadians was worth the risk and the cost. And that's part of our democratic process as well.
Jennifer, Enbridge does say, and I'd like your view on whether or not we ought to believe these numbers, $270 billion worth of economic activity to Canada's bottom line over 30 years, more than 1,000 full-time jobs, long-term full-time jobs throughout the Canadian economy, access to a fast-growing Asia and Pacific Rim economies. Do you really think all of that is possible?
Well, if the pipeline is built, then Alberta's oil sands definitely will have access to Asian markets. It'll probably provide an uplift on the price producers receive. That'll increase producer profits. They will reinvest it in the Canadian economy. That'll increase the taxes the government of Alberta receives. That'll increase transfer payments to the rest of Canada through equalization. I don't know if the specific numbers are accurate. We'll have to wait and see, but there will be economic benefit and jobs created as a result of building the pipeline.
Okay.
Now, the issue is whether or not everyone, and not just the Joint Review Panel, British Columbians, Albertans, people in the rest of Canada think that the economic benefit is worth the cost and the risk of pipeline spills.
We're going to put
this brings us back to a question of proportionality, and I think that's where we have to talk about the fact that 8% of the total economic benefits would go to British Columbia, while we would bear 100% of the marine spill risk, and that's the position of the BC government. And I think it's hard to get around, no matter which way you slice and dice Enbridge's numbers. The GDP creation, the job creation, the overall tax revenue, and the royalties overwhelmingly favor Alberta, while Alberta takes a very small proportion of that risk. And so that's why, as a British Columbian, I do want to see British Columbians have more power over the decision-making process, and First Nations to be listened to, since they have, in fact, lived on these landscapes for time beyond memory, and they, I think, have a pretty good idea of what it might take for people to be able to survive and balance their impact on the landscape into the future. So the fact that those voices were effectively taken into consideration by the NEB and then set aside in the recommendation, I think, is democratically a problem.
Kai, I do want to put a couple of pictures up that you would be all too familiar with living in British Columbia, but which perhaps people who live in the province of Ontario may be less familiar with. This is Kitimat. This is where the supertankers are supposed to hang out at the end of the day. And I wonder what you think the environmental concerns are that come with building this pipeline.
The fundamental concern that I think is not addressed by the Joint Review Panel's report is contained in a study that was done by the federal government itself on the behavior of bitumen in seawater. And so we saw in the case of the Kalamazoo spill in Michigan in freshwater that this stuff sinks. It sinks and it coats the bottom of the river, and in that case they had to actually dig out and replace whole sections of riverbed. When you're in a marine environment, the effect is that much worse. And so we know from the Environment Canada studies that a portion of this product would stay on the surface, and if the waves weren't too high and the weather wasn't too bad, we might be able to get booms around that and contain it. But another chunk of that oil would of course disperse into the water column, and it could be moved hundreds of kilometers by the currents, and there's a large portion of it that would simply sink to the bottom of the ocean, and that's impossible to recover, and I think could have environmentally devastating effects. And so the fact that simple study on what bitumen actually does when it hits seawater, and the fact that there's no known way to clean it up, wasn't included in the Joint Review Panel's report, I think is a major oversight, and it lessens the trust that British Columbians have in the overall review and the recommendations that came out of it.
Jennifer, would it be safer to transport this stuff by rail?
Well, rail to where? I mean, so the issue that Kai was just talking about is marine safety, and we certainly can't put trains on the ocean. Regarding the pipeline itself, the U.S. EPA, in its environmental review of Keystone, has assessed that it is safer to transport crude oil by pipeline rather than rail. The risk of spills and incidents is lower, and also the greenhouse gases associated with the transportation would be lower.
And a follow-up to you as well, Jennifer. We've heard Kai talk about the importance of consulting Aboriginal communities who would obviously be potentially affected by all of this. Do you believe they have been adequately consulted by Enbridge on this project?
Enbridge consulted with Aboriginal groups 80 kilometers on either side of the proposed route, and that's compared to the basic landowners. They identified landowners 1 kilometer on either side of the proposed route. So their consultation process with Aboriginal Canadians was much more encompassing. Now the issue is not whether or not Enbridge did its job, but also whether or not people think that it was enough. And I think for some, there can never be enough consultation, and no matter what Enbridge, the federal government, other organizations say, it's quite possible that their fears will never be totally allayed. And that's unfortunate, but it's also a reality of the discussion regarding the use of fossil fuels.
Sure. Kai, let me get your comment on a quote I'm going to read to you now. This was reported in the Edmonton Journal just the other day from the director of the Centre for Natural Resources Policy at the Canada West Foundation, who said, "Here is the fundamental challenge. The general public may include individuals with the technical expertise to work through both sides of the story. They may also find the circumstances that permit resource projects to proceed while protecting health, safety, and the natural environment. However, most of us either are not qualified or just aren't familiar enough with the specifics to speak with authority on the merits of a particular project, myself included," he says. "That's why we have expert regulators, and we need to be able to trust their judgment. If we can't or we don't, the system begins to fail." Your comment on that, please.
I think he's absolutely right. He hits the nail on the head when he's talking about trust. And the fact is that in British Columbia, people, especially those who were involved in the review process, simply don't trust the regulator enough to hand over full decision-making power to this panel. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Before they ever showed up, we looked at who the Joint Review Panel was and where the funding comes from. Of course, part of it does come from the industry that they regulate, and the panelists are not judges or lawyers. They are people who are appointed often from within the industry itself. So once they showed up in British Columbia, it was not a happy time. We weren't treated like we were being consulted or asked for our input on this. It was more like being treated like the enemy, and from trumped up security threats to closed hearings surrounded by security guards, just to the lack of accommodation and the lack of engagement by the regulator as they held that panel. I think a deep level of mistrust arose among people here in British Columbia. So that's compounded when, again, the federal cabinet takes away the power of the regulator to make that final decision and kicks it back to politicians. Greg Rickford, who I do respect immensely, is a nurse by training, and that's a profession that I think has a lot of honor, and I don't know how to take care of people the way he does as a nurse.
He's the
I'm
minister
trained as a
in the
journalist,
Harper
and I don't
government.
think That's right. He's the Natural Resources Minister whose name was on that press release, although they couldn't put him up in front of a camera to defend it. I'm trained in a totally different career. I don't have the technical expertise either to be able to wade through all those thousands of pages of engineering reports. But the fact is, Mr. Rickford has the power and the people of British Columbia do not. And I think that's the fundamental problem, is that the politicians are no more qualified to judge this and indeed disregard evidence in all sorts of policy-making decisions. But this time, suddenly the scientific evidence is taken as gospel, and the voices of British Columbians and the people who are most directly affected are left out. And that's what we seek to correct at Dogwood Initiative.
Okay, we've got about 2.5 minutes to go here. I want to touch on a couple of more things, so if I can get brief answers from each of you on this, that will help. Jennifer, you talked to us about the 209 conditions Enbridge has to meet in order to make this happen. Is there a deadline or a time within which they have to meet those conditions?
Yes, so Enbridge has to start construction by December 31st, 2016, and otherwise its license to proceed with the pipeline will expire. So
they have a great deal of incentive to get their P's and Q's in place quickly, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Kai,
which also happens to be the deadline for the next federal election, and don't forget that all three opposition leaders have promised to cancel this project if they are elected. So Enbridge is on a tight time frame indeed.
Okay, and are you preparing, I'm hearing you're preparing some kind of provincial referendum on this as well, Kai?
Well, the referendum is up to the Premier to call if that's what she wants. If she's looking for a mandate from the people of BC to stand up to the federal government, then that's certainly something that I think people here would be happy to provide. But we operate under a different set of legislation. It's unique to British Columbia, and that's the Recall and Initiative Act, which allows us to actually write our own citizen-drafted legislation and present that to our politicians with the support of people from around the province. So what we're building right now is the canvassing teams that would be needed in order to gather the support for a piece of legislation that we could bring in if our provincial government reverses its position and indeed goes back on its rejection of the pipeline. But the answer for now from Premier Clark, from 130 First Nations, and from 2 in 3 voters in British Columbia is no. This project isn't going through. It has not met our conditions, and it's not going to proceed.
Okay, and Jennifer, of course, the other big project that's out there still is Keystone XL. Now, if that eventually were to get the green light from the Obama administration, what do you think would happen to Northern Gateway?
I think that there is still support for Northern Gateway even if Keystone XL was approved. In 2012, 99% of our oil went to the United States. And I think given the shale revolution in the U.S. and the resistance to new Canadian pipelines, producers in the oil sands are looking for other markets to sell to.
Can I ask a real offbeat question here? Well, of course I can. I'm going to try it anyway. Here we go. Jennifer, is it possible not just to build a refinery in Alberta, refine the oil there, and then take it maybe, say, through Churchill, Manitoba, send the pipeline that way instead of going through all of this pristine area?
Well, I suppose it's... Yeah, potentially that could happen, though I think Manitobans would argue that Manitoba is probably just as pristine as British Columbia. Though
Churchill, Manitoba is not as pristine as British Columbia. I'm sorry, it's just not as beautiful. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but it's just not.
All right, but the issue is that the West Coast is closer to China, Japan, South Korea. And the East Coast is closer to India. So it really depends on which Asian markets these producers want to serve.
Gotcha. Kai, you want the last 30 seconds to finish it up?
Well, we can't forget about Europe either. The EU did relax some of their fuel standards, or they're making signals that they're willing to accept Canadian oil, whereas they weren't before. So as a result of the Ukraine crisis, there are markets opening up in that direction, and there are people locally in places like New Brunswick, where the Irving refinery is, that have, I think, expressed a lot more openness and a lot more willingness to work with Alberta in getting that resource to their province. So when you look at this through a lens of democracy and less about oil itself and the debate around fossil fuels, I think you have to look at where this product is going to be welcomed by the people who are actually going to add value to it or ship it. And right now in British Columbia, I just don't think that we're going to see that large majority of people turn around and suddenly say, well, yes, we'd like to become the oil port for Alberta.
Understood. Jennifer Winter in Calgary and Kai Nagata in Vancouver, it's good of both of you to join us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.